Good evening, everyone, and welcome. We are so glad to have you here with us. My name is Megan Melvin, and I use she, her pronouns. I am the Jean S. and Frederick A. Scharf Curator of Design in the Department of Prints and Drawings at the MFA and curator in very close partnership with the artists of the exhibition Paper Stories, Layered Dreams, the Art of Ekua Holmes. Thank you for joining us for the program Picture Book Power, Current Perspectives on Contemporary Children's Literature this evening. The Museum of Fine Arts, MFA, is in Boston, Massachusetts. Founded in 1870, the MFA stands on a site which has long served as a place of meeting and exchange among different Algonquian nations, including the Massachusetts. As a museum, we acknowledge the long histories of the land we occupy today and seek ways to make Indigenous narratives more prominent in our galleries and programming. This land acknowledgement is being actively discussed and reevaluated to be a more actionable statement that reflects our current commitments and collaborations. Please note this program is being recorded. The resulting recording may be uploaded to YouTube and the MFA's website. And just some information for today's program. A transcript and closed captions for this program are available through the Rev for Zoom live captions. To enable closed captions, go to the bottom of the Zoom window, click the up arrow button next to closed caption, and then click on the show subtitle to start displaying Rev live captions. During the presentation, please use Zoom's chat function to ask questions and share comments. We're going to try to say our names when a new speaker begins to help lend clarity to the transcript. We also want to thank Sophia Walter for her technical support and organization of today's program. Please feel free to write in the chat if you need any help today. And here's just our program overview and for the speakers this evening. So I'm going to introduce the exhibition and then we're followed by our conversation and then our group discussion. Before we begin, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge our funders towards Paper Stories, Layered Dreams, the Art of Ekua Holmes. This exhibition would not be possible without the support of our lead sponsor, citizens. Additional support from the Benjamin A. Trustman and Julia M. Trustman Fund, Eileen M. Robinson and Thomas E. Lewis, the Shirley and Michael Casson Fund, the Susan G. Cohn and Harry Cohn Jr. Fund for Contemporary Prints, and the Eugenie Prendergast Memorial Fund. So before we start the discussion, I would like to provide some context and a very brief overview of the exhibition currently on view at the museum until January 23, 2022. This exhibition is part of a loose series of exhibitions centered around art and children's literature that have been held at the MFA since 2016. The MFA has actually held exhibitions like this for over a century, but that's a topic for another talk. As part of our mission and institutional strategy, the museum has actively created opportunities for exhibitions that engage visitors of all ages, especially our youngest visitors. With book illustration art for children at their heart of these exhibitions, the museum also seeks to underscore the significance and presence of art in books for children. For various reasons, illustration art is often presented as separate or distinct from art when it is art. Recent exhibitions on book illustration art here at the MFA highlighted the art of earlier 20th century artists and authors, but I, along with other colleagues, hoped for an opportunity to present the exciting work and change in contemporary children's literature, particularly here in Massachusetts. It really was a dream come true for me, first to be introduced to Aqua Holmes, and especially the moment when she agreed to have a show at the Museum of Fine Arts. Aqua and I met in 2018, and little did we know then what was on the horizon. Our exhibition, now housed in 2 galleries, finally opened in July of this year having been delayed and reshaped numerous times due to the pandemic, but it still achieves all we hoped for. If you haven't had a chance to see the exhibition, visitors are welcomed by the larger-than-life girl from Golden you see here on the screen. The adjacent walls are hung with examples of Ekua's independent art of the last 10 to 15 years as an introduction to her multifaceted artistic career and to provide context for her intense engagement with and impact on children's literature in the last 7 years or so. Visitors get some indication of the extraordinary depth and scale of her work and her approach to portraiture of persons or cityscapes, real, imagined, or reimagined, as well as her deeply personal engagement with complex histories and narratives. This selection of works are displayed to introduce the viewer to Voice of Freedom, Ekua's first book illustration project on the life of Fannie Lou Hamer. This book project was deliberately presented separately from the other books featured in the exhibition to give it the space it merits, to introduce illustration within Ekua's larger body of work, and to orient visitors to new realities in contemporary literature for children that do not align with some literary traditions of the past. The adjacent gallery highlights works from 4 of Ekua's book projects. And while there were no silver linings to the pandemic, it did bring us more time to work on the exhibition together. And as a result, we were able to respond to an earnest desire on Ekua's part and mine, and that of many other colleagues, to include younger voices in the interpretation of the material. And so I'd like to invite Ekua, if you just wanted to say a word or two about our work with the team curators in this gallery and how their voice is heard here.
Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Aqua Holmes, and I am delighted to be here this evening to share this time with Megan and Catherine and everyone else that's here to talk about the current state of children's literature and our place in it. Young voices are central to the work that we do. Someone wrote to me in one of the comment books, I feel like you've spoken up for me, even though I'm only 10 years old. So that 10-year-old doesn't necessarily expect to be spoken for, but we're in the business of making sure that that 10-year-old sees their reflection, enters those doors and windows that Rudine Sims Bishop talks about. And so working with the teens was a great opportunity because they represent sort of this middle point. They're not necessarily looking at picture books, but they may become the people who are buying the next generation's picture books. So I was very curious to hear what they had to say about the meaning of picture books in their growing up life, what they saw as missing in picture books that they knew about, and what they'd like to see illuminated in picture books. So we had some great conversations. Each one of the 4 students was assigned a book that they read, digested, asked questions about, investigated, and then wrote the amazing text that they wrote for the exhibition. I am extremely proud of them. If this is the next generation, then we don't have a lot to worry about. We can just relax a little bit. They've got this. And so I want to say a special thank you to them tonight. It was one of the high points of this exhibition for me.
Thank you, Aqua. So these galleries feature, as I said, 4 of Aqua's books. And so we have Black is a Rainbow Color, which was written by Angela Joy, published by Roaring Book Press. Out of Wonder, a compilation of contemporary poetry, published by Candlewick Press. At the time of the opening of the exhibition, the recently published Saving American Beach by Heidi Tylene King, published by G.P. Putnam's Sons. And we also included a display related to Out of Wonder, another Candlewick Press publication, to give a hint at Aqua's art making process and to create an invitation for all to engage with art anew. And so this is just the quick highlights of the exhibition. I hope that many of you are able to come to see the exhibition in person if you haven't been able to do so already. And now it is my great pleasure and honor to introduce this evening's panelists. Their accomplishments and leadership in their respective fields are significant, but to give us as much time for the conversation as possible, I'm only able to highlight just a small selection of their professional highlights. And so first, I'd like to welcome Katie Cunningham. Katie Cunningham received her BA in English from Simmons College in Boston. She has been a member of the editorial team at Candlewick Press in Somerville for 18 years. Now an executive editor, she works on fiction and nonfiction projects for kids from birth through their teen years, including titles in Candlewick's Big Picture Press and studio imprints. Katie has been the editor for numerous award-winning publications, including one of my favorites, Julian is a Mermaid. The author Jessica Love credits Katie for having rescued the book from possible oblivion, for which we are all so very grateful. Aqua Holmes. For her collage-based art, Aqua Holmes investigates family histories, relationship dynamics, childhood impressions, the power of hope, faith, and self-determination. Also a lifelong educator and community activist, Aqua has been a visiting artist and lecturer and held artist residencies throughout New England. In her first public art initiative, Aqua launched the Roxbury Sunflower Project, a marvelous extension of which graced the MFA lawn this summer and fall. For her work in illustrating children's literature, Aqua is the recipient of numerous prestigious awards, beginning with her first illustration project, Voice of Freedom, Fannie Lou Hamer, Spirit of the Civil Rights Movement. Aqua was awarded a Caldecott Honor, Coretta Scott King's John Steptoe New Talent Illustrator Award, as well as the Robert Siebert and Hornbook Awards. She has been awarded the coveted Coretta Scott King Award for The Stuff of Stars and Out of Wonder. She's also the Associate Director at the Center for Art and Community Partnerships at Mass Art, where she originally received her BFA in photography, where Aqua manages and coordinates community-based multidisciplinary arts programming through Spark, the Artmobile. And finally, I'd also like to welcome Kathy Mercier. At Simmons University, Kathy directs the Center for the Study of Children's Literature, the graduate degree programs in the Master of Arts in Children's Literature, the Master of Fine Arts in Writing for Children, and dual degree programs that combine the MA with degrees in library science or teaching or writing for children. An internationally renowned expert in her field, Kathy holds degrees in psychology, English literature, as well as a PhD in children's literature from Boston University. Kathy has served and is active on numerous advisory panels, juries, including the Caldecott Award and the Boston Globe Hornbook Award, and has served as a judge for the New York Times Best Illustrated Books. And Kathy is also a trustee of the Eric Hall Museum of Picture Book Art. And so this was just only the very top highlights of all these speakers' extraordinary work. It's my great honor to welcome you all here this evening.
Thank you.
And so let's dive into the conversation. It's so wonderful to have you here. And I'd like to begin with your first project, Aqua, Voice of Freedom. Can you tell us how this project came about for you and why this particular subject, the story of Fannie Lou Hamer's life, resonated with you?
Well, the way it came to me is it's kind of a Lana Turner type story. I don't know if everyone in the audience is old enough to know who Lana Turner is, but she was discovered sitting at a drugstore counter getting soda pop. And someone from Candlewick was visiting JP Licks, and I happened to have a display of my work there. This is probably in 2012. And she wrote to me an email and asked me, would I be interested in illustrating a children's book? And I thought, maybe. But I wasn't really taking it seriously until several weeks later, she sent me a manuscript. And at that time, the manuscript had a slightly different name, but it was about Fannie Lou Hamer. And I was an admirer of hers. To me, she was a hero because she was powerful. She spoke the truth. She bucked the system. And just everything I knew about her, I loved. So strike one for illustrating a children's book about Fannie Lou Hamer. When I opened the manuscript, I turned to the first page. It says that she was born in Sunflower County, Mississippi. And I was like, oh, well, this is my story. And this is destiny opening a door for me, because years earlier, I thought about becoming a children's book illustrator, took a couple of classes, and just realized that I just didn't have the stuff of, what illustrators are made of, and gave that up and moved on to other things. But I always say, sometimes you chase the dream and sometimes the dream chases you. So you never know what's going to happen. So I ended up working on this wonderful book and learning as I grew into illustration and into publishing, because I knew nothing. I hadn't been trained as an illustrator. I had not worked on a team before. So I learned a lot about the fact that I wasn't going to meet the writer, that the writer was not going to, we're not going to be having conversations about what color dress she should be wearing and what the kids should be doing and things like that. And also that that picture books, they're called picture books for a reason, because the imagery is essential to the book. And that where when I came to the first meeting, I expected to get a list of, okay, we want a little girl standing by a farm, or we want a little girl with a cow. And just, I would go away with this list and I would create these works of art. But instead they said, no, you're a partner in this project. What do you think the first illustration should look like? And I was, honored and stunned, and at the same time terrified, that because that's a lot more responsibility than someone just giving you a list of what to do. But it was a wonderful partnership with Candlewick Press, the art director and the editors. And I think the book stands well on the bookshelf, and I'm proud of it. So that's how I started. And after that, I've been busy. When I looked at your ending slide, sometimes I look at all of those books and I can't believe that, that I've been able to do all of that in such a short period of time. But when you find something you love, your passion is the fuel that keeps you going. So
thank you so much, Ekua. That's wonderful. And following on from that, I'd love to ask Katie, every book project is different, but can you give us a sense of the stages and timeline for developing a picture book?
Absolutely, and I would love to, especially because considering that Voice of Freedom was published in 2015, Ekua's body of work is enormous. It takes about 2 or 3 years from start to finish from the publishing house's point of view to make a picture book. And that is if the stars align and the illustrator can start right away and everything moves along as it should, which is most assuredly not every case. And as Ekua was saying, I think it's surprising to most folks who aren't in the industry that generally how it happens is that the author and the illustrators do not communicate directly with one another. That is the work of the art director and the editor. So we sort of funnel communication that way, which does tend to work, but it's always a wonderful moment when the creators get to meet, because they inevitably do. And it is like 2 old friends have met that have not yet actually had any face-to-face time. The way it works at Candlewick is that there are always several sets of stages. Those are shared with the author. Then the artist moves on to final art. That's shared with the author. All of these rounds are circled through proofreading and copy editing and the like. And yeah, and then eventually you end up with a book and you send it off, usually to the Far East, and then it gets printed, gets on a boat, and gets back here in a zippy 3 years.
Right, especially if there isn't a pandemic, right?
Yes.
I just wanted to apologize for my bird chirping in the background. Whenever I get on a Zoom, she wants to weigh in on her opinion about these things. So I've got the door shut, but her voice just resonates, so I apologize.
That's wonderful. Kathy, I'd love to invite you to comment on Voice of Freedom and its impact on contemporary literature for children.
Sure, I'm amused that that's your bird, Aqua, because my cat, who never troubles me if she's met people on the screen before, just is stalking me. She must somehow know there's a bird out there.
You're the bird.
So that's very funny. I'm really delighted to be here with all of you tonight. And let's see, Voice of Freedom published in, am I right, 2015, 2014, 2015. Really 5 or 6 years ago, and yet it did change a lot in children's picture book illustration and contemporary children's literature. So, the Cybert Award, which Voice of Freedom was honored with, one out of many honors for that book, started as an award to recognize informational books for children. Well, informational books, the really, really boring phrase. I suppose it's a tad bit better or about as worse as nonfiction books, right? But what we've seen in this category of information books, where one would put Voice of Freedom, is tremendous, tremendous creativity and narrative art, and in a freedom to take a series of individual poems and put each poem as a set piece to an interpretive piece of art. Both tell their own narratives. They complement each other. There are moments of counterpoint. They each stand alone, but they also work together. And to do that in a book like Voice of Freedom, what this artist and author did was opened up a set of conversations we as a nation needed to have. The voices that were loud and powerful, but not being heard. The voices that we were not sharing with our children in the books they read. The artistic visions we were not sharing with our children. So those of us who live in Boston have known Aqua Holmes' art and presence in the city in lots and lots of ways. So it sounds really odd for us and for me to be saying, oh, well, here's the debut book in 2015. Here's her first illustration. It's like, well, kind of if you take away the last 35 or 40 years, maybe it's the first, but it's the first entry into children's literature. And that entry of artists willing to enter the conversation that children's picture books are having. And Aqua talked about conversations, and every single picture book is a conversation between the art and the text, between the writer and the author, but they're also conversations with readers and with teachers and librarians and parents who will have those conversations with young people. Some of the ground that was broken with this particular book, I think from a kind of a pure literary perspective, you can create art that goes with poems and they can both interpret in their own ways. They can both open up space for a reader. So this book to me is the perfect book to come before Out of Wonder. Out of Wonder with a series of poems by different writers. Yep, perfect. Thank you. It's been a song. And each poem is dedicated to each poem is a poet in tribute to another poet. And this art then is a visual poem in tribute to two poets who are working together. And so what they seem to be portraitures, but they're also interpreting a voice, music, background, landscape. So they are really, pardon my language, busting open both of those poets. So we begin to see layers and layers and layers of meaning both in the art and in the text. I love this collection of poems because, and thanks for selecting this one, celebrating Walter Dean Myers. So, if one didn't know Walter Dean Myers before they opened this book, Walter Dean Myers is the Walter Awards by We Need Diverse Books are named after Walter Dean Myers, who is one of the most celebrated African-American writers in our history, and whose son, Christopher Myers, is a celebrated artist in and of himself. But to encounter him for the first time, to see Walter age 10 in this image, is to be introduced to an artist and a writer who imagined the idea of really focusing on these young Black boys and men and young adults. I love this particular image because we see that court and we see that basketball with those sunbursts around them, reeling with potential, reeling with freedom. Aqua, would you say something about this image and what you had in mind? Because this is one of my favorite images from that book.
I think it's one of my favorites too. And as I'm sitting here looking at it, I don't know if you noticed that there's a community built into the wall that is holding and supporting this young man wherever his aspirations will take him. And I think that that's an important function in any community, is like, who are the adults that are holding and supporting children as they reach toward their dreams? This was the perfect book after Voice of Freedom, because Voice of Freedom took me so deep into history, so deep into Fannie Lou Hamer's life and her way of operating and all the trauma that she had experienced and her victorious nature, and getting to the end of her life and wondering if she had done enough. When we look at her life and we say, oh my God, how did you accomplish all of this? Well, coming over to Out of Wonder, every page was its own story. And so there was a lightness of moving from Emily Dickinson to Walter Dean Myers to Rumi. And it really brought me back to poetry. Poetry was something I had loved as a teenager, but I'd kind of, put it aside, wasn't reading poems, but all of a sudden here I am immersed in these worlds of poetry. So I think that these two together were great introductions to children's literature and what it can be. Children's literature can be introducing children to a specific type of writing, a specific century of writing in a way that's very accessible and very shareable.
Can you talk for a minute about those faces? Are those specific historical people we should know? Are these figures from your own life?
Those are my peeps,
Okay.
My son is in there, my granddaughter's in there, a couple of my best friends are in there.
You are in there, aren't you?
I'm in there, yes.
Yes.
And
Okay.
what I love about collage is this idea that you can hide things, that there are many layers to look at. And so in all of my illustrations, I'm always looking to say a little bit about my life through the lives of others, like a Fannie Lou Hamer. Fannie Lou Hamer, she lived 200 miles away from where my grandparents were. And I realized through her story, something about their story, that they were dealing with the same things that she was dealing with. So you might find something about my family in her story. And I like to do that.
Thank you so much. Kathy, I know you had also had some thoughts about Akua's work on the book on Barbara Jordan.
Yes. So these are images from What Do You Do with a Voice Like That, the story of the extraordinary Congresswoman Barbara Jordan. How did this book come to you? And do you think that this book breaks the kind of ground that Voice of Freedom and Out of Wonder break? Where does it fit in your own kind of transcendence as an artist?
I was very honored to have the opportunity to work on this book. Barbara Jordan is another person who I would say I knew a little bit about her and I admired what I knew. But once you get into a story as an illustrator, at least for me, I do a lot of research on my own. I'm looking for visual cues along with the narrative that the author has prepared. And these are, as someone said earlier, loud voices, but voices that we hadn't been listening to. And I felt honored to have a second person to investigate, because every book that I do, I learn so much. I think, yeah, I know Black history and I know about civil rights and but I don't know the depth of the narrative of some of these people, the depth of their sacrifice. And doing these books allows me to really be steeped in that knowledge and to be able to share that with other people. There's more to the story, obviously, than you can fit on 32 pages. But somehow those 32 pages have to be so rich that they can represent that life for young people and families. Barbara Jordan's story was incredible. She had a shorter life on the public stage, but she used that time that she had very effectively. And also her landscape, again, coming from the South, having certain kinds of things in common with a Barbara Jordan and seeing how the family supported her. I think it's very important to show that none of us arrive where we are on our own. There are people in the family who cheer us on, who give us words of advice, who send money when we go away to college, send us, care packages. And I think it's important for communities to understand that it's the whole community that's making that trek. And I think her story touches upon that very well. And then the other thing that I loved about her story was the idea of reinventing oneself. When one branch is closed off, that we don't just sit down and give up. We reinvent ourselves, especially those of us who want to be involved with shaping the world. We find another way, we find another pathway, and Barbara Jordan did that extraordinarily.
Thank you so much, Aqua. My snapshots here certainly give an indication also about the process you and I engaged in and how we began to select works and also make the difficult decisions of works that we ultimately decided not to include in the exhibition in order to present a clear narrative for the visitors. So I'm excited to be able to show some of the works from this wonderful book. I know I get the question all the time, and you get it 1,000 times over, is about sort of the art and your art and the process of art making. The prominence of art in picture books really pushes the artist to create a visual narrative that both reflects and expands on the text. Can you describe a bit how you use color and collage to convey layers of information and talk a bit about the decisions you make about what to include and what not to include?
That is a huge question, which I could approach page by page in terms of what to include and what not to include. But since we're talking a lot about Voice of Freedom, I want to talk about palette. My color palette really shifted with this book. If you look at my earlier work, you're going to see a lot of primary colors. And I tell people that that's because when we were kids in kindergarten, you got that box of crayons at the beginning of the year, and they were primary colors. And they really, to me, they're just like jewel tones, ruby red and sapphire blue and emerald green. Those are the colors that childhood is made up of in my world. But when I got to this book, I was not only representing a different landscape from the urban area that I'm from, but also a story that had overtones of oppression, sorrow, and I needed to express that in the color. I felt that way. And so I shifted my palette to represent what a Mississippi landscape might offer us. Greens and browns and this teal blue that I love so much. And I positioned the color yellow or gold as a sign of divinity in Fannie Lou Hamer's life. So a lot of the pathways are gold. She's often wearing a yellow dress. And this is my way of, for those people who like to read between the layers, we could say, of that she always kept God with her, that was her source and her strength. It was a divine source and strength. Just the fact that we even know her name is a destiny and a divinity about her life. So that was a challenge, shifting my palette. It was a challenge, but also a joy to be able to do that and know that that was part of telling her story. I know there was more to your question than that, but.
Right, well, I also know as, actually, we have some wonderful questions also from some of the team curators, and some of them, one of the creators Shelby, who was an undergraduate intern, also asked if you could speak about how some of your works are both beautiful and painful, and some of the images that you choose to include in the works.
So yes, thank you so much for that question. I included this picture, for instance, Worse Off Than Dogs, which is a portrait of an outhouse. And I had a personal experience with outhouses because I used to go south when I was younger, and my grandparents had an outhouse. And you can imagine being a city girl, you know, who can flush inside and linger with a magazine if necessary. And all of a sudden in the middle of the night, I've got to go out in the pitch black and find this little hut and do my business. So that really, really connected me to the story. And on this particular page in the story, it's talking about how the landowner, the dog had an indoor facility, but Fannie Lou Hamer and her family and kids had to use an outhouse. And that's why it's called Worse Off Than Dogs. But it's one of my favorite illustrations for that reason, that I had a very personal connection. And I think in all of these books and all of these stories and poems, first you look for yourself. You look for an experience, an emotion, a thought, a family member. You look for a reflection. And sometimes that reflection is where you begin to really build the imagery. And this is one of those cases. Can you go to the next slide? I'm not sure what it is.
Yeah. And
this is
this is
another one. Right. And I never considered not showing the beating because it's central to Fannie Lou Hamer's story. And there's a lot more about this beating that is not necessarily in the text. For instance, the other prisoners were actually forced to beat her. So the person, the police officer, sat and watched that and forced these other prisoners to beat her until they were tired, and then he would make someone else. So I wanted to show that there was a civilian involved, and hopefully parents are with their children, teachers are with their students, asking these questions about why is this illustration the way that it is, and looking into that further. I thought it was important that she survived this. She was bruised and beaten, but she survived it. And again, to play on that idea of divinity. So we have her in this yellow dress, and we also have this light of divinity shining forth, but also the fact that there are people in other cells that have to watch and listen to this beating happening. So there's a lot in here, and many people have expressed to me that this was their favorite illustration, which was not something I expected. Maybe it's the truth that is appealing for many people, and that it's not glossed over.
Thank you. So I'm going to turn to Kathy, following on from that, and be interested to know what are some of the shifts and changes in the art and picture books that you have observed in recent years, and what do you wish there could be more of?
I wish there could be more Aqua Holmes books in the world, but they're coming, and we're really, really pleased, really happy for that. So I'm really intrigued by the last part of the conversation here about the way in which an artist confronts both joy and pain in their work, and has to tap onto something deeply personal in order to bring this work, which is very public, right? That the work of an artist is intensely personal and yet has this very public showing. And there's this, again, that kind of conversation that we talked about before. I think in the children's book world, some of the shifts and changes in picture books have done that work of reflecting and expanding, to use Aqua's words, but are also getting braver at showing contradictions, right? Where the art might be doing something a little bit different than the text is doing. And so the reader then has to think about these gaps in meaning between these two. One isn't I think early on, Aqua said something about I expected to be given the art and said, now you draw a picture of this dress, and this is the color of the dress this child is wearing. Well, the art of a picture book is interpretive, and it's additive. It is not simply duplicative. So the part of what is really exciting in children's books right now has been the ability of artists to reproduce their work in a range of colors, unlike things we've ever seen before. You see that in this image from Black as a Rainbow Color, right? Artists have been able to use a wide range of materials. So Aqua's work in collage, I think 20 years ago, I don't think we could have reproduced the kind of collage work, the depth, the saturation of color, the sharp outlines, but also the muted lines that we saw. I'm just looking at any one of the pictures here on my desk, the layered work that is part of the title of this exhibit. The found materials, if you go back to that image of the bridge, yep, back one, there we go. I'm going to let Aqua talk about this, but those feet are walking on a bridge of other things that have been cut out and layered and collaged. And that kind of sense of either creating what one could find in nature or in the real world, or going out and using found objects in the city, in the grocery store, on the newspaper stand, right? Are all of the digital technology and technologies of reproduction have really allowed us to get closer to the artist's interpretive vision of what's going on. Aqua, can you comment on this image and what they're walking on here?
Actually, thank you, Kathy, for that question. These are people who are marching in, or not marching, but walking in the bus boycott. People who walk to work for 318 days. Yep. And underneath are news clips from Klan rallies and marches, planning meetings that groups had with Martin Luther King Jr. as a foundation for what they were doing. So there's a lot of ways, as you say, you can interpret this. You know, they're putting these things underfoot, this segregation, this oppression, they're putting it underfoot. And it's not just one or two people, it's women, it's men, it's children. They are all doing this work together. When I started working on Black as a Rainbow Color, because it is so centralized around the idea of meaning of color, I use these black lines the way that a coloring book is created. And I say to myself, okay, what is the first artistic choice that children are making? A lot of times it's in coloring books. In a coloring book, you're presented with a white page with black lines, and you get to decide whether the dress is pink or blue. You get to decide whether the bunny is yellow or purple. And so the idea that this child who's pondering why there's no black in the rainbow is getting to color her world, not just with colors, but also, as you say, clippings from the Times, things that hold meaning, that tell stories. So that was the sort of underpinning of this book, Black as a Rainbow Color.
And this image also, that all of these legs walking across and the way you've used line and color also creates a sense of a stained glass window, mm-hmm. right? There's a sacredness mm-hmm. about these figures that are walking. And there's, I love that dual conversation that this image,
absolutely has. And later on in the story, there is a picture of a stained glass window with the 4 women of the movement who are oftentimes left out of the narrative and not illuminated the way that they should be.
And so responding both to you, Aqua, and Kathy, I'd love to ask Katie, could you provide some perspective from the publishing side and describe some of the factors influencing layout and design? For instance, to me, it's very interesting the use of how the space below the image creates the area for the text, and how the interplay between text and image can move the narrative along.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is the bookmaking aspect of it. And I think it returns to this, this notion of a conversation that's happening between the two creators, between sort of all of the people who are making the book and the inevitable child who's reading it. You know, oftentimes we will decide and at the publishing house where the text will go, and a piece of art will be created around that idea, but not every time. It all sort of depends on who the artist is and how they work and what they prefer. I mean, I think that the idea of there being some layer of difference between what the text says and what the art is saying is sort of the magic thing about a picture book, particularly because children who are not reading at, you know, the most fluent level are looking at the pictures and are reading pictures with such incredible skill, a skill that you, I think, inevitably lose when you become like hitched to the world of the words. But children live in the world of pictures for a long time, and they point things out and see things that you don't see. And in that way, the artist always has a leg up in truth for the child. And that is why it is so incredible that as picture book art has progressed, it has included art that is sophisticated like Aqua's and has allowed for these incredibly deep levels of meaning. You know, referencing the clan in this image and putting these black people in a position of power over the clan in this image is an incredibly powerful and subversive thing to do in a book for children. And, you know, we can accept that now as kind of the way that this medium works. It's wonderful. It's a wonderful time.
Just want to make a confession that I'm one of those artists that sometimes forgets that text has to go on the page, and I have to like rethink things and like, oh yeah, I've got 2 paragraphs that I've got to fit here somewhere, because you get carried away with, you know, filling the page. And I think about, we were talking about techniques of today's world. I think about Javaka Steptoe's book, Radiant Child, and he created these images on pieces of wood, you know, nailed together, and it gave the book such texture and just such power. So I never tell myself no, and possibly because I wasn't trained as an illustrator, I don't know to tell myself, no, you can't do that. And so I learn as I go, and therefore the publishing team also tries to help bring the vision forward if they can.
But speaking of many layers, Aqua, I'd love if you could just spend a minute or two to talk us through the sort of the layers of meaning and message that you've included in this image too. So here we have a mother, a caregiver going for a photo album with her children, but you've created extra strips and included extra language and meaning through your collage.
Yeah, thank you for that question. First of all, I love family photos, and I am the keeper, along with my cousin Phyllis. We're the keeper of the family photos. And, you know, when we get together, we take them out and look at them, and we are able to share them with younger generations so that they can connect with relatives that they will never meet, but they can still hear the stories. The other language that I think Megan is speaking about here is the language of fabric and fibers through kente cloth and African patterns. Kente cloth is not random. Each one of those symbols has a meaning that is very specific. And I wanted that central piece to be so bold that it almost demanded to be interpreted by someone who wants to go into that layer of the story and go a little bit deeper. I also have some family members here in some of the fabric that's represented. You can see some of the photographs of family members woven in as well. So here's this comforting, comfortable blanket, shawl. Some people think of it as a couch, but it is holding them together, and it is holding them with history. And I love the text on this page. Black is history, Black is mystery, Black is the love that lives inside of me. I can't remember exactly what it says, but that is what we're trying to convey here, and how wrapped the children are in the storytelling of this relative, whether it's their mom, an aunt, a big sister, could be anyone in the family who has been chosen as the person to carry those stories forward.
Thank you so much, Ekua. On that deeply personal note, I'm so excited to talk about your latest book project, Dream Street. My copy arrived at the museum today. I was dancing through the galleries. Can you tell us about this collaboration with your cousin, Trisha Elam Walker, and how you drew on your body of independent art for this project? Because you're really coming full circle. Your art, independent art, is incorporated into a book of your own writing.
So this is a really a great day for us. I don't know exactly what day the books were delivered, but these books have been caught up in the supply side interruptions and have been sitting somewhere. They were supposed to be out in September, and Trisha and I had planned on doing some kind of an event. But Dream Street is where we grew up. And when we were girls, Trisha's mom was a librarian, Barbara Clark Elam. If you're from Boston, you probably know that name. And anyone from Simmons actually knows that name as well. She was beloved. And the story goes that she had a book for any situation in your life. She could recommend a book for it. And if you thought you were going to get socks for Christmas or a doll or something, no, you were going to get a book, and you were going to love that book. So she made sure that we went to the library weekly. And so we grew up reading. And at a certain point, we wanted to make our own books. And she showed us how to make the cover and how to make the signatures and all that kind of thing. And I was always enraptured by the imagery. And Trisha was, attracted to the words and storytelling. So life goes on. My cousin is a published author, and I've now become a published illustrator. And we're like, we should do something. This is like when we were kids and we used to sit on the floor and I'd do this and you do that. And we went back and forth with ideas. And her ideas to me were like, oh, okay. And my ideas to her were like, well, but so to move things forward, I sent her a bunch of images, a bunch of JPEGs of work that I had already created. And I said, well, maybe you could, create something out of these. And she came back, she says to me now, she says, I was a little bit daunted by that because I'm so used to being the person who sets the framework for the story. But now I had to find the story in your collages. And she did that. She found a wonderful story there and wrote this story about Dream Street. And it's really an introduction to some wonderful characters who are, archetypes of people that we grew up around, families, elders, kids in the neighborhood, kids with dreams, and in a place where people nurtured those dreams, where no one told you no. I shouldn't say no one told you no, but more people told you yes. And it's just lovely. And so we now have this published book. We dedicated it to both of our mothers, who in their own way, I always say for my mother, I know she wasn't crazy about the idea that I wanted to be an artist, but she never discouraged me. And she would always put me in places. As a matter of fact, she brought me to the MFA when I was young to take Saturday classes. So this is in honor of them, and the fact that we are now part of creating a world that they couldn't have imagined. My Aunt Barbara didn't have any books about African-American characters to recommend to us as children, but now we are building a world where every child is celebrated through some pages of some book somewhere. And so we're just so excited to be doing this. We're doing a lot of school visits. We'll be doing some things with the schools that we attended here in Boston. And we just want to thank our community of Roxbury for being the kind of place that was a dream street. So all of you out there who are from Roxbury, you know what I'm talking about. This is for you.
It's wonderful. And I can't wait to get the book out in the gallery and also to flag all the works in the show so that the visitors can make the connection between the book and your works of
Exactly.
art.
Yeah.
I have quite a related question for Katie. That can you comment on the considerations given to stories that are specific to a time and place, whether past, present, or imagined, from the perspective of a publisher, and sort of the decisions that influence your choices?
Yeah, I think that well, I think that when it works, I think that it is always best to follow your creators, right? So if your creator has established a particular setting and a particular time frame, you follow them there because they are doing it for a reason. It's either intensely personal or it is very specific, and in that way becomes universal in its specificity. But setting tends to function like a character, right? Which is exactly what Roxbury does in Dream Street. It becomes an unchangeable part of the story and the narrative. And so I would say that all of the many settings that you can choose to set a story in provide some indication to the reader of the thing that you're trying to tell them. So I would say that from a publishing point of view, it's not anything that we would ever put a limitation on. We would just sort of happily follow our creators down the road. I mean, much in the way that it sounds like Trisha and Aqua worked on Dream Street.
And Kathy, through this project, I've learned that you and a number of your colleagues teach a class about Boston through the lens of children's literature. How does Dream Street expand that body of literature?
I don't actually get to teach that class.
No, you don't.
But
Well,
that's okay.
maybe this book will make you want to do it.
It will. At Simmons, we have all of the first year students take a course in Boston. And there are lots of different topics and ways to think about Boston. And so two of my colleagues who both happen to be former students and one of the faculty members in the Children's Lit program are teaching a course called Boston Childhoods. So here we have two creators who grew up in Boston, who are family members, who have long active community histories and who have stayed in Boston, right? And you know this book to me just shows childhood as shaped by the place it is, and childhood itself as shaping the place it is. So when you think about Dream Street and the ways in which this street holds its children, forwards its children, supports them and guides them up and up. I love the image of male child readers in this book. I just love that because we think that little boys don't read. And here it is, you know, a child with a book, you know, a boy child with a book right here in our own backyard. I love that, the celebration of reading in this book. But also, you know, childhood doesn't happen on Beacon Hill. I mean, it does happen on Beacon Hill. And the ones we study about and we read in, you know, 19th century literature happens on Beacon Hill, right? But here, this is in Roxbury, and Simmons is just down the street. And so this is a Boston childhood. And so to think about children's literature as a place that reveals the city, as well as a place that lives in the city. I'm so glad that Aqua mentioned Barbara Elam's tremendous influence and work at the Boston Public Library, just a force to be reckoned with. And the generations and generations and generations of readers that she worked with. Yeah, I know there are children on Beacon Hill, but there are also children beyond Beacon Hill, right? There are lots of childhoods. The ones we too often privilege and study are the ones that are Boston Brahmin, the ones that have been raised with privilege, the ones that have lived in the shadow of the Gold Dome, right? So that we get to, this book says, there are lots of kids everywhere. There are lots of communities raising kids. And it says we have an obligation to every child in this city. This city has an obligation to every single child in it. And we as the adults in the city have an obligation to collectively raise those children and forward them and forward their dreams.
And can I just interject here also that the children on Dream Street are they are living in the life of joy and love and care. And if I could have every child look around their life and appreciate those things, the simple things in life that are the things that now as adults we look back on and remember that Uncle Charlie took us fishing, and those kinds of things that maybe as kids we're moving so fast growing up that we don't think about them. But the children on this street it's the best street in the world. And Dream Street is not just a physical place, but it's also an internal place. It's a community place. And we are all a part of it as we encounter one another and nurture each other's dreams. So, we could expand on a Dream Street in that way as well. When I looked at Ezra Jack Keats' Snowy Day, it wasn't just the people that reminded me of my own life. It was the landscape. It was the streetlights and the fire hydrants and the bricks and those kinds of things. So you brought that up, Katie, about the landscape. And so it is an important character in this story.
And what I love this image as well. You realize you, Ekua, are using so many primary colors. And I love the different saturations and the different hues and the kind of the thicknesses of them. But there's something so, I don't want to say childlike because it's often used in a derogatory way, and I mean it in a really celebratory way. But just as the crayons in Black as a Rainbow color, our first encounter with color is in this primary palette, and those are the colors we learn in school, and how the blue and the yellow create the green. There's a return to something so joyful is the right word, so joyful and exploratory and discovering in this book. But I also see it as a call to adults to take on this responsibility and sustain and enable this joyfulness.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah, and maybe to join in the joyfulness of childhood. We don't have to leave it behind. In my work at Mass Art, when we set up art supplies and things like that, of course, the kids know just what to do. But before you know it, the adults are there. And they're the ones that you have to drag away from the table because they've put their childhood up on a shelf somewhere. But when they see those crayons and markers and colored papers, and then they reconnect with it. We never have to walk away from it.
That's wonderful. Thank you, all of you. And I know I could keep peppering you with questions all evening, but we have so many participants who have joined us here this evening, and I'd love to be able to have them ask you some questions as well. So we'll move on into the next part of our Q&A, but I will pop up two of the images. I think this is the one that you were referring to, the wonderful image of the boy reading in Precarious. And Sophia, I don't know if you're able in the chat, if you're seeing any questions that have come up, but we'd certainly like to invite the audience to address all of our panelists.
Happy to, Megan. There is a question that was asked earlier. If possible, could you discuss where and how you select, gather, and store papers for your collage?
That is a wonderful question. And it keeps shifting as I get more and more papers that I need to store and sort and all of that. I have not found a magical solution, I'll be honest with you. I'm constantly making chaos and then reconvening everything in, yellow, blue, red. But I get my materials everywhere, from wrapping paper. If I'm at a bridal shower, people say, don't throw that paper away. Akua's gonna want that paper. Or, old newspapers and things like that. Just things that you find that they resonate for a moment, and you might not know where it's going to end up. I look at these two pieces here with the girl. There's a piece of wallpaper there that someone brought me that they were a contractor, and they had scraped it off of a wall behind a radiator, and they knew I would want it. And I did, and it's in this piece now, or the third grade reader that's represented, with the young girl releasing a bird into the air. So I haven't found the solution yet. I guess more and more flat files, more and more files would be the answer. But if you've got suggestions, I'd love to hear them.
And a related question is, how do you incorporate photos into your collages?
Mm. Well, many of the collages begin with a photograph that I've taken for the most part. I try to take my own photographs. And as I think Megan mentioned, my degree is actually in photography. And I learned a lot about composition, value, and those kinds of things. So for instance, this boy is a young man that I saw in a health center waiting room. And he was doing just what he's doing here. He was reading, he was intent, he was engaged, and he was adorable. And he was dressed pretty similarly, very classic Boston with the Red Sox cap and a t-shirt and all of that. And so I asked him, well, where's your mom? And his mother came, and I asked her if I could photograph him, and she allowed me to do that. And that gave birth to this piece. So photography is very much a part of what I love as an artist. And that is one of the ways that I incorporate photography into my work. If you're able to come to the MFA, you'll see some other pieces there that come from or that are inspired by vintage photographs of my family. And there's another way that I try to work with those photographs. So, one thing about being an artist, it's an evolving thing. What you did last year is not necessarily what you're doing right now. So we're always looking, we're always learning, and we're always experimenting.
Thank you. Here's one more question. Many of your compositions remind me of textiles. Do you sew, quilt, or perhaps even incorporate embellishments in your practice?
I definitely do not make quilts because that would require another room to keep fabric scraps and things in. But I do sometimes incorporate fabric into the collages. If you look at girl literature, her collar is a lace that I found somewhere in some yard sale or something. And it just speaks to her girlness, especially of the era that third grade reader is a part of. And it's just stuck right on there, but it's a perfect complement to the washes behind her. It's this crisp white lace collar. And so yes, I do have fabric that's woven into some of these pieces, but I have not yet approached quilt making. I'm very much an admirer of quilters though, because they are adding this sewing onto the piece, but I know that some of my work is very quilt-like. Mhm.
Thank you. And a new question is, I'm wondering about the relationship between serendipity and planning and collage making. I feel like when looking at your work, Ekua, the longer I look, the more details pop out and add so many rich, sometimes in unexpected levels of meaning. And yet they also seem so perfect and important to the image overall that it must be planned. How do you create meaning in your work?
Well, I think the first part of your observation about it seems planned when you get to the end, but during the making of it, you're wandering. You're wandering among your containers of paper. I call it hunter gathering. I'm always gathering things, and then as I'm making, I'm always hunting. I have folders and containers, and I'll go through, and things will speak to me to put them aside for a particular project that I'm working on. I keep a container for every book project. And so anything that is related to Out of Wonder that I think is out of wondery would go into that container. And so there is a serendipity about that, and an organic nature of evolution, I guess is what I would say. And in the end, maybe success is that it looks like it was planned from the very beginning. Maybe that's part of what makes a successful work of art. The second part of your question about how do I create meaning, I wonder if it's the viewer that brings meaning to the work when they view it. We could all look at these two pieces right here, and if we were to write a story, we would have a different story for every single person. So I think I depend on the viewer to bring meaning to the piece and to reflect back to me sometimes things that even I have not noticed, that are hidden there or that exist there. And I see someone's asking, how did I create the rug? So the rug is probably from a clipping from a magazine where someone was selling rugs. So auction catalogs, I picked up an auction catalog the other day that was all of these beautiful Persian rugs. And I'm like, oh my goodness, what am I going to do with this? But so things like the books in the library, the maps on the chair, they come from very, very different places. But it is very much a cutting, juxtaposing, layering over. That is how the work is made.
Aqua, this is Megan. I just wanted to jump in and ask if you could say a little bit about the post to the right of the boy, because you and I have, looked at this work and talked about it a lot. And I was always so focused on your use of maps. I love, for instance, the bit of map on his sneaker that is a section that shows sort of Boston, Natick, Needham. So it's Boston centric piece of map that I didn't look at the post. And then you said, hey, Megan, what do you think of this? And I was, so maybe you can tell the audience.
Well, there comes a point where I don't want to tell everyone what I think things mean. I'm more interested in hearing, I think it might have been you, Katie, who talked about when children look at art, they can see things, they have a way of looking at pictures because that's their language for the first, maybe 5 years, maybe 6 years of their life without this focus on words and literature. And so to me, to explain everything that I meant about a work of art takes away some of the magic for me. I have had people tell me incredible stories about what they see in my art. And sometimes I say, wow, that's a better story than I had. I really like that. So I'm going to leave that alone for now. I'm going to take artistic license and not say what it means to me, but okay. I'm glad that somebody called it out because it is a little unusual. It's not attached to a piece of furniture. It's, what is it doing there? But you could look at that piece and never even notice it. And then other people could zero right in on it. And that's the beauty and subjectivity of enjoying art. Somebody asked, was Aunt Mary a seamstress? I see a McCall's pattern and the pretty dress she is wearing. That's a really good observation too. I don't think she was a seamstress, although in that era, a lot of women made their clothes. Even in my day, a girl was expected to know how to sew, cut a pattern, and I made a lot of my clothes as a teenager. I think it's a little different today. I could be wrong, but the pattern, it could represent, a number of things. Thank you for the question, though. And here's the question I always get asked: what type of glue do you use? That is the number one question that I get asked. And I use matte medium, and I generally use Golden as a brand. So Golden, send me some stuff. Okay. What other illustrators do you love? Oh my goodness. I love, my goodness, can I remember her name? Cosby. What is Cosby? You guys know her name. Her first name is Cosby. And she just won an award last year. But I mean, I love Kadir Nelson. I love, oh my goodness. I love so many. And I, of course, I'm not going to be able to think of any of their names. But I love children's books, and I have quite a collection. But those are a couple that come off the top of my head. Kadir Nelson is just, he's a master at what he does. And as a matter of fact, I'm working on a book about Coretta Scott King. And you probably know that he's done a book with Ntozake Shange about Coretta Scott King. And I thought to myself, who can follow Kadir Nelson on a biography? But I'm gonna try. And y'all will let me know if I do all right. Let's see. I see someone asking how long was I a student at the Elmelu School of Fine Arts. You know, for me, it felt like a lifetime of sitting at her knee and listening to her talk about life and teach us things, but it probably wasn't more than 3 years. Once I started going to school in Cambridge, it took me so long to get back to Dorchester, which is where her school was at that time, that I had to drop out. But I was in several recitals, and we remained friends over the years. She had also taught my mother, if you can believe this. My mother was a student of hers when her dance school was in her living room. She means a lot to me, as you probably know that.
I see there's a question about your, I see there's a question about what scissors you use, Ekua, too. And I have to say, for those of you who've seen the exhibition, this the scissors, we put those scissors in at the right, remember how we put them in right at the last minute?
Yes.
In the display.
Those wonderful black scissors. I have to get some of those.
Right.
I just, I shouldn't say just, in the last year, bought myself some new scissors. And I think they're Friskers. And I got some small scissors. I started saying to myself, you know, when you start out in a profession or just in life, I'm a thrifter. And I was raised by a very frugal woman. And it hit me one day that I could buy some new scissors that are sharp, you know, so I bought a bunch of scissors. They're orange handled Friskers, and they're different sizes. And, you know, they cut like butter. And the scissors I was using before, they were all clunked up with medium and glue and tape and things like that. So those are the scissors that I use. And then I have some antique scissors hidden somewhere in my piles of stuff that I also like to use occasionally. And someone asked, what's my bird's name? My bird's name is Zenobia, and we call her Z. She's a sun conure, very beautiful bird, and very noisy, as you can see. Here's a good question. How did you decide on the wall color for the exhibition? I don't know if Megan might want to take a stab at that question, because it was quite, do you like it? Before I answer the question, do you like it?
Yes, that was an extra interesting process, because picking a wall color in an exhibition is already a time-consuming process. You go through many iterations after you have a sense of what the works of art will be, how they're going to be laid out. But Ekua and I had the great challenge of picking the paint color during the lockdown, the sort of the period of lockdown in the pandemic. So typically we start with small paint samples, worked our way through holding it up to the original works of art. And then when we narrow down a palette, we paint large scale samples of the paint, so you get a good sense of it. And we went round and round, but you can't pick a paint color over Zoom. So I was so grateful I had permission to come into the building to work on this exhibition. And so basically Aqua and I were allowed to come in with a handful of other colleagues who got special permission. We would try to get the painters to paint these samples and hold them up. And we went through several rounds, and ultimately Aqua also invited in another artist, Chanel Thurville, who had a display and an exhibition in the adjacent gallery. That was another wonderful moment of serendipity. It was actually, I think that was maybe our third round, Aqua, of looking at the large paint samples with Chanel and another team, that we landed on the current color, which I believe it looks purple, but is called Scandinavian blue. And we tried every color of the rainbow, didn't we?
Yes, and it was amazing how that purple seemed to work with everything, whether it was the primary color pieces or the more southern landscape pieces or the portraits. It just seemed to be the perfect neutral that was alive the way that you would expect children's literature to be alive and electric, and at the same time subtle enough to highlight the work. The work really stood out from those purple walls. So I'm happy folks like it. I thought, oh, the MFA is going to think I'm crazy, but none of these other colors work for me. And finally, I think everybody landed in the same place. Like, we just couldn't deny that it worked with all of the artwork. And so there you have it. It was fun.
Wonderful, thank you. Well, unless there are any other, Sophia, unless you're seeing any other questions, maybe this is the moment to wrap up. I'm Katie, Aqua, and Kathy, I'm so grateful to you for your deep insights this evening. And Aqua, as you said, showing us how alive and electric contemporary children's literature is. It's been an honor to work with you and to hear from all of you this evening. I know we're all very grateful.
And Megan, someone's asking about best advice for a first-time writer. I wonder if Katie or
yes.
Catherine might want to.
That would be fantastic.
Yes, I actually just answered in the chat, but
Okay.
I'm happy to tout this advice because it is the best advice. It is just read absolutely everything you can get your hands on. It is being published today for children. Go and speak to your librarians about what books they love, what books kids are excited about, what books they think are just really innovative. Your local public librarian is your best friend if you would like to be a writer. And Kathy continued on. Kathy, you want to shout that out there?
Yeah, I continued by saying, don't hide behind perfection. Write it, get it out, show it to people, get responses, see what they think. You know, just so many writers write and never let go of it and never show it to people. And I understand there's a lot of ego on the page in writing and illustrating, and it's hard to let go of that, but you'll never get it to another reader unless you show it to someone first. And I would give a nod to the publishing houses here too. You know, knowing what's out there means going to the library or to a bookstore and looking at what publishers are publishing. I love Aqua Holmes' work. Who's publishing her work? What other things do they publish? What can I learn from the kinds of people that they're publishing? Is this the kind of publishing house I want to be with? Because they're doing this kind of book and I see myself working with them. So, you know, read a lot, write first, talk to people who know something about books, and then kind of set your aspirations about who you'd like to have publish your work, and then get it out there.
Great advice.
All right, so, well, thank you all. This is a heartfelt invitation to everyone. If you are able to come to see the exhibition in person, these are the books that are highlighted in the show. We would welcome your feedback on this program, as well as your input regarding future online programming at the MFA. And your responses will help us significantly in developing programs for all audiences. So in the coming days, please expect an email from learning@mfa.org with a copy of the evaluation that was just introduced and resources highlighted today. And we certainly invite you to explore more at the MFA Boston online events. So thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope to see you again soon. Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.